We're going to take a look at one more example of constructing a truth table. I'll go through this one a little more quickly than the previous one, but I'll still attempt to explain every single step. Also, I should point out that this truth table will have 8 rows instead of 4 rows. The reason the number of rows doubled is because we have an extra simple statement R. Every time you pick up an extra letter, it doubles the number of rows. But remember, all the possible combinations of truth values for the simple statements will already be given to you, so you won't have to worry about figuring them out. Okay, so let's construct a truth table for the following compound statement. We have a biconditional. On the left of it, we have P pointing to the negation of Q, and on the right of it, we have Q conjunction negation R. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 connectives, so we're going to end up needing 5 more columns in addition to the P, Q, and R. Let's start with the parentheses, because that's first in the order of logical connectives, hierarchy of logical connectives. Within this parentheses, there's a conditional and there's a negation. Between the two of those, negation is higher on the hierarchy, so the negation will happen first. Then, completing the parentheses, this conditional will happen second. There are some authors that will say set up all negations first, but I like to stick with the hierarchy. Speaking of which, we are finished with this parentheses, but now we have this parentheses. So, within that parentheses, we have a conjunction and a negation. The negation takes precedence over the conjunction, so it will happen next, so that will happen third. But that doesn't finish the parentheses. We still have a connective, a conjunction, that will happen fourth. That completes the second parentheses, so now we look outside the parentheses. The only connective outside the parentheses is the biconditional, so it will happen last. It will happen fifth. Now let's set up our columns. The first connective we're setting up a column for is this negation. When you set up a column for a negation, you look to the right of it. To the right of this negation is a Q. So negation Q will be the first column that we figure out over here. Don't need a lot of room for that. Then, the second connective we'll set up a column for is this conditional. On the left of it is the P, on the right of it is negation Q. So P pointing to negation Q will be the next column. Hope I have enough room here. That was second. While I'm at it, I want to circle the connectives that we're using to build each column. That will help us focus when it comes to determine the rules that we need to use. The third connective we're building a column for is the negation. To the right of that is the R. So negation R will be the next column, so we will use the rule for negation. The fourth connective we're setting up a column for is this conjunction. To the left of it is Q, to the right of it is negation R. So conjunction, Q on the left, negation R on the right. We are setting up a column for the conjunction, so that's the rule we will use there. And then the fifth and final column we'll set up for the biconditional. On the left of it is a parenthesis, so we will write the parentheses and its content. To the right of it is another parentheses, so we will write those parentheses and their contents. So parentheses, P pointing to negation Q, biconditional, parentheses, Q, conjunction, negation R. Looks like we're just going to make it. And that last column is built around the biconditional. Now that we've set up the columns, let's go one column at a time by listing the rule and the columns we're going to apply it to. For the first column we're completing, we're doing a negation, and the rule for negation is to change the values. I'll write the rules up here. Which column do we do that to? Look to the right of the negation symbol, and you see the letter Q. So we're going to go to the Q column and change all the values. We're doing this rule to this column. So the Q column is 2 T's, 2 F's, 2 T's, 2 two F's. So we just change them all. The two T's become two F's. The two F's become two T's. The two T's become two F's. The two F's become two T's. That was an easy column. The next column is a little sneakier. Not because it's a conditional, but because the columns that we're going to look at aren't next to each other, and in a conditional, the order matters. For a conditional, the rule is false if T points to F. So that's the rule that we're going to do. Which columns are we going to do it to? Look to the left and to the right of the conditional. To the left, we see the letter P, so we go to its column. To the right, we see negation Q, so we go to its column, the column we just created. Now here's an example of where filling in a truth table can be a little tricky because the columns that we're focusing on are not next to each other. There are two columns in between. When that happens, what I would recommend before doing your rule, if you're having trouble seeing what you need to see, is to cover up the columns in between. Now, on your paper, that could be as simple as laying a pen or pencil over it, or maybe placing your fingers over it. But up here, I'm going to need something a little wider and a little whiter. A little bit of wordplay there. So I'm going to cover up the two columns in the middle because I do not need to look at them right now. I need to look at these two columns. And do the rule for conditional, which is false if T points to F. Now, the only time I recommend drawing more stuff inside the table is when you have a conditional, because the order matters. We need to think about P pointing to negation Q. So what I'm going to do for each row is draw an arrow from whatever's in the P column and point it to whatever's in the Q column. Now, of course, if you're covering these with your fingers, you would have to lift your fingers. But the order matters in a conditional, so I'm literally going to draw the arrows pointing from the left to the right. In this case, the P column to the negation Q column. Sometimes the columns you're looking at are not left to right, but right to left. That's when it's even more important to draw the arrows to help you focus on the correct direction. And I'll just have to draw right through there. So, to complete the next column, I'm going to apply this rule to each of these arrows I just drew. I'm looking for T pointing to F, and when I see it, I will write false. So let's take it one row at a time. First row, do we have T pointing to F? Yes, we do. Rule says write an F. Second row, do we have T pointing to F? Yes, we do. Third row, do we have T pointing to F? No. Fourth row, no. And in the rest of the rows, we're not going to have T pointing to F because none of these start with T. So the only two rows where this rule applies are the first two, we have T pointing to F. So those are the only two rows where we write false in this column. That means the remaining rows are true. Gotta remove this now. I might use this paper again. All right, let's move to the next column. And you'll notice I'm erasing these arrows that was pointing down because as I move from column to column, I will be referring to different previous columns. So what you could do, if you're doing this on paper, is to put a pencil, lay a pencil pointing to the columns that you need. So you might want to have multiple writing utensils handy. And then you can use other ones to cover up the columns you're not using. So let's move to this column. This one's easy. The rule for negation is you change the values. And the column I'm going to apply it to is what's to the right of the negation, which is column R. So I'm doing this rule to the R column. The R column alternates true, false, true, false, true, false, true, false. So to change them all, we just have to change the first one and keep alternating. So true becomes false, and then true, and then false, and then true, and then false, true, false, true. Negation is pretty straightforward. The next column is a conjunction. The rule for conjunction is true, only if all t's. So that's the rule I'm going to do. For the columns I'm going to do it to, the left side of the conjunction is a Q, so I need column Q. The right side is negation R, and negation R is the column I just created. So we're in another situation where the two columns we're looking at are not next to each other. So it might be a good idea to cover up all the columns in between. Let's see, we need the Q column and then the negation R, so we don't need the three columns in the middle. So give me 1 second to tape over the columns in the middle that I'm not focusing on right now. And I'm not focusing on this column over here. Let's just pretend it's covered up. All right, so I'm looking at these two columns, and I might as well cover it up. You do whatever you need to do to help focus when you're building a truth table, because the larger the truth table, the more stuff there is as you move from left to right. And you can get lost in all the T's and F's if you're not very careful. So if covering up what you're not using is what you need to do as you're evaluating the truth values in a column in a truth table, then cover them up, whether it's with your fingers, your pencils, or doing something like I'm doing. Okay, so I'm going to apply this rule to the two columns that are not covered up. The rule is I'm going to write T only if there's all T's in a row. So let's start with row 1. Is this all T's? No, rule doesn't apply. Is this all T's? In the second row, yes, the rule applies. True only if all T's. These are all T's. This row is true. Are these all true? No. Next row, are these all true? No. Next row, are these all true? No. Next row, are these all true? Yes, the rule applies. True only if all T's. These are all T's, so I write true. And it's the only other one where they are all true, where the rule applies. So only the second and sixth rows obey this rule. So only the second and sixth rows are true, which means the remaining rows are false. I may need some of these papers. We'll figure out what I need to look at in just a second. All right, on to the last column, where we are evaluating the biconditional. And the rule for biconditional is true only if both sides match. So that's what we're going to do. What are we going to do it to? Let's find the columns. On the left side of the biconditional is a parentheses. So we look at the column that contains its contents. The column that represents P pointing to negation Q is this column. So we will be focused on that column. On the right side of the biconditional is another parentheses. Its contents is Q conjunction negation R. That's the column that we just completed. So we will be doing that rule to those two columns. And again, if you need to cover up the column in between, that's what you do. I am going to cover up the column in between, but it's a pretty skinny column, so I don't need a fat piece of paper to cover it up. So how can I cover it up? Well, I have a yardstick here that might do the job. We need to look at this column and that column, not the one in between. That will do. And you know what? I've got all this paper with tape on it, so let's just cover up the things to the left that we don't need. They are kind of distracting me. So we don't need all this over here. Come on. And again, you don't have to literally cover up columns that you don't need if you can focus. But if it helps, there's no shame in that. I'm not going to cover up those, they're way over there. Okay. So I'm doing this rule to these two columns. If they match, I'm going to write true. First row, do these match? Yes, I'm going to write true. Next row, do these match? No. Do these match? No. Do these match? No. No. Yes. In the 6th row, they match. I'm going to write true. In the next row, no. In the next row, no. So the only rows where the 2 columns match are the 1st row and the 6th row. So those are the only rows where it's true in this last column. That means the rest of the rows in the last column are false. And that would complete the truth table. If you have any questions, you can use the view an example. You can also use Ask the Instructor, or you can send me a picture of the truth table in a text message, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible.